is it.
Are you sure?
Let me check the map again.
It's so peaceful out here, isn't it?
Oh, it's on, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a perfect day to just sit and talk.
You can see over there, they are already starting to build the new road.
Oh, I see it now.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is huge! Oh! I told you there were big ones in here.
This is just how it is. We try to make the best of it.
I know it's hard to talk about, but we need to figure this out.
I just don't understand, I just don't understand why you would do that.
I know. Did you gather enough for tonight's dinner?
Yes, and I found some good firewood too.
You know, I was thinking about our last project.
Oh, what about
What
it?
about it? It was a success, wasn't it?
Cho nó chẳng không có một xe có tăng để cho chị cũng được.
It's important to remember the community relies on this.
I understand the responsibility, and I'm ready for it.
The early morning mist hung in the air like a shroud, the earth still cool from the night, but the sun's first rays promised a scorcher of a day. In the distance, the quiet rhythm of the morning was broken only by the sound of the shovel striking the soft soil of the pond. A man and his wife were at the water's edge, the task at hand daunting yet necessary. They had decided to restock their pond with fresh fish, but the work was harder than they had imagined. The couple had spent years tending to this pond, an integral part of their livelihood, but today they were preparing it for something new. They had plans, big plans for the future, but to make it happen, the pond needed a complete overhaul. "Honey, is the fish still alive?" the woman asked, peering into the murky water. "It looks so big. Is it heavy?" She fumbled with the equipment, her hands trembling as she glanced up at her husband. "It's heavy, all right," he grumbled back, his muscles straining with the effort. "I'll release the water tomorrow and then we'll plant rice. Or if that doesn't work, we'll try fish again. Horizontal or vertical, either way. We need to fix this place." The couple had worked tirelessly on this pond for years, but this was the first time they were attempting such a drastic change. They had long discussed draining the pond, cleaning it, and rebuilding the ecosystem that sustained them. The stakes were high, and the pressure to get it right was weighing heavily on their shoulders. The wife continued with the task, carefully untying the tarp they had stretched across the bottom of the pond to prevent debris from collecting. The large stone and wood frame surrounding the pond was still intact, but the water, which had always been a constant in their lives, was now an obstacle. They had to fix the drainage system, something they had neglected for years, to allow for proper flow. "Honey, get me a knife to cut this loose," the man said after a few minutes. His voice was steady, but there was a tense edge to it, the kind that came from too many tasks left undone for too long. The knife, when handed to him, gleamed in the early sunlight. He worked quickly, slicing through the tangled rope that held the tarp in place. They both stood in silence, their hands moving automatically, yet a sense of urgency hung in the air. The machine they had been waiting for was still not there, and the pond was not draining fast enough. They had no choice but to take matters into their own hands. "The machine's on its way," he said, his voice tight with frustration as he made the call. "It should be here soon." She nodded, but the skepticism in her eyes was hard to miss. They had been waiting for days, and now, as the sun rose higher, there was little time left to waste. They had planned everything down to the smallest detail, but without the machine, everything was at a standstill. "We'll have to drain the pond first," he said, clearly irritated. "See if there are any fish left. Then we'll fix the place and install the drain properly. It's long overdue." The couple set to work, moving in a synchronized rhythm, but even their years of experience couldn't prevent the growing sense of dread creeping in. The water level was dropping slowly, but there was still no sign of the machine. As they worked, a thought began to gnaw at the man's mind. What if the machine didn't arrive? What if their plans, all their efforts, came to nothing because they couldn't get the equipment they needed? It was a terrifying thought, but one he couldn't shake. He had put everything on the line for this. The money, the time, the effort. It had to pay off. It simply had to. Finally, after what felt like hours of waiting, the phone rang. The man's heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" "The machine is on its way," the voice on the other end said. "It'll be there in about 30 minutes. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. The damage had already been done. The pond was now half dry, and they had yet to catch a single fish. They needed to act quickly before the day turned to night. "Let's go catch what we can," the man said, his voice growing sharp with determination. "We'll finish the rest later. Right now we need fish, and we need them fast." They rushed to the pond, grabbing their nets and setting them up with practiced ease. The water was shallow now, and the fish were much easier to catch. But as they reached down into the murky water, the weight of the situation came crashing down on them. "I see one," the wife said, her eyes widening with surprise. "It's a big one." The man's heart raced as he spotted the fish she was referring to. "It's a catfish, heavy, but not as big as some of the ones we used to catch," he said, pulling the fish from the water with a grunt. They worked together, pulling fish from the pond one after another. There were tilapia, carp, and even a few catfish, though none as large as the ones they had hoped for. "I remember catching a big carp here last year," the wife said, holding up a smaller fish. "Do you remember that?" The man nodded, but there was little satisfaction in the memory. This wasn't the same. The pond was dying, and they needed to replenish it with something better, something bigger. The fish they were catching now wouldn't be enough to sustain them for long. "We'll rest for a while," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. The sun was brutal and the work was exhausting. "The fish will be fine for now. We'll catch more later when it cools down." They took a break, sitting in the shade of a nearby tree, the sound of the machine arriving in the distance. The man didn't move from his spot as the machine roared to life, the engine thundering across the field. They had one shot at this, one chance to fix everything they had built and hoped for. As the machine began to work, merging the two fields into one, the couple sat in silence, watching the ground shift beneath their feet. The soil was being leveled, the pond reshaped, the future of their farm starting to take form before their eyes. "This will make it easier for planting rice," the man said, watching the machine's blade cut through the earth. "And we can release fish in here again. It'll be perfect." His wife, sitting beside him, nodded thoughtfully. "After the fields are done, we could even plant vegetables or fruit trees. There's potential here, more than I thought." The man glanced at her, his mind already racing with the possibilities. They had invested so much into this farm, but now, as the machine worked tirelessly to prepare the land, he saw the chance for something bigger, something lasting. They had their fish, their crops, and soon everything would be set. But even as the work continued, the weight of the decision still hung over him. There was no turning back now. The future was uncertain, but the man was determined to make it work. Whatever it took, he would rebuild his life and the farm that had been his livelihood for so long. As the machine rumbled to life, its massive blades cutting through the earth with mechanical precision, the The couple watched, their eyes filled with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The hard work, the waiting, and the uncertainty of the past few hours seemed to culminate in this one moment when everything could either come together or fall apart. The earth beneath them shifted and groaned, but for the first time that day, there was a sense of progress, a feeling that they were moving closer to their goal. "This is it," the man muttered under his breath, his gaze never leaving the machine as it efficiently smoothed out the land. "Once this is done, we can flood the field, plant the rice, and start over. New fish, new crops. This is the future we've been waiting for." His wife, still sitting beside him under the shade of the tree, nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. There was something in the way the machine moved, something in the way the earth was being reshaped that made her uneasy. The physical transformation was obvious, but what about the deeper changes? What about the unspoken shifts? The ones that came with leaving the past behind and stepping into a new future. "Are you sure this is going to work?" she asked softly, her voice carrying more doubt than she wanted to admit. "I mean, we've been working this land for so long, but what if it's not enough? What if we can't bring it back like we think we can?" The man turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "It has to work. We've got no choice. I'm putting everything into this, and if it doesn't work, then we'll try again. We always have to try again, don't we?" His voice was strong, but the edge of worry was unmistakable. They had both invested so much in this farm, in this life, and the thought of failing was more than either of them could bear. But the truth was undeniable. This was their last shot. As the machine continued its work, the sounds of it echoed across the land, reverberating through the fields like a drumbeat of progress. But even amidst the noise, the silence between them was deafening. The weight of their unspoken fears hung thick in the air, and neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between the past and the uncertain future they were about to step into. "I'll take the fish to the market," the wife said suddenly, breaking the silence. She stood up, brushing the dust from her clothes, her movements purposeful. "You stay here and make sure the machine finishes. I'll sell what we caught today. The money will help us buy more supplies for the next round." The man hesitated, watching her gather the fish and place them carefully in a basin. It was always like this. His wife, the practical one, always thinking of the next step, always finding a way to keep things moving. He admired that about her, even if it made him feel small in comparison. "I'll go with you," he said after a moment, his voice firm, but there was a faint trace of reluctance in his words. He wanted to help, to share in the burden, but he knew this wasn't his place. The market was her domain, and she had always handled these things better than he ever could. "No, you stay here," she replied, giving him a quick, reassuring smile. "You're the one who knows how to handle the land. I'm the one who knows how to make the money. We both have our parts to play." With that, she left, walking toward the small market in the distance, the basin of fish in her hands. The man stood there, watching her go, the weight of their conversation still hanging between them. The machine was almost done, and then it would be time for the next step. But what came after that? What would they do if the fish didn't thrive, if the land didn't yield what they needed? He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something they couldn't control. As he turned back to the field, his mind still racing, the machine came to a stop. The operator climbed down, wiping sweat from his brow, and gave the man a nod of approval. "It's done," the operator said. "We've leveled the land and merged the two fields. You're all set." The man walked over to inspect the work, running his fingers through the freshly turned soil. The earth felt rich and ready, but something about it still didn't sit right with him. The transformation was impressive, no doubt, but was it enough to turn the tide? He turned to the operator, his voice thick with unease. "You sure this is going to work?" The operator shrugged. "It should. The ground's been leveled. The water will flow better now, and the fish will have more room to thrive. But only time will tell." The man nodded, though he didn't feel any more confident. The uncertainty gnawed at him, a constant reminder that no matter how much planning, no matter how much effort they put into this, there were always things beyond their control. With the machine gone, the man was left alone in the newly transformed field. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. He sat down on a rock, his thoughts swirling. The field looked different, cleaner, more open. But did it really change anything? Was this the solution to their problems, or just another step toward an uncertain future? He glanced back at the house where his wife had gone to sell the fish. She had always been the steady one who knew how to make things work. He admired her strength, but a part of him wondered if he could ever match it. Could he really bring this farm back to life? Could he really make this new venture a success? Just then, he heard footsteps approaching. It was his mother, her face etched with concern, her eyes scanning the landscape. She'd been busy with other tasks in the house, but now she stood in front of him, her expression serious. "How's the work going?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with the weight of years of experience. The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's done. The machine's finished and the land is ready, but I'm not sure. I still feel like something's missing." His mother stepped closer, her gaze softening. "You've done a lot, son. Don't let your doubts stop you now. You have everything you need right here. The land, the resources, and the will to succeed. Just trust in yourself." The man looked at her words sinking deep. She had always been his biggest supporter, even when things seemed impossible. And yet her words didn't erase the fear in his heart. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many unknowns in this new chapter of their lives. "But what if it's not enough?" he asked quietly. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder, a firm but comforting gesture. "It will be enough. It has to be. You're doing everything you can, and that's all anyone can ask for." He nodded, but the unease didn't disappear. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the newly leveled fields, the man couldn't shake the feeling that the future was still a long way off, and that they were still far from being ready to face it. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and tension. The land, once divided into two separate plots, now lay open and unified, ready for the next phase of their plans. The water was flowing more freely now, the drainage system newly installed, and though the work was far from over, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment in the air. But as the days wore on, the man couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. He spent most of his time on the farm, checking on the newly leveled fields, keeping an eye on the fish they had caught, and waiting for the next shipment of supplies. But his mind often wandered back to the same question: what if it all went wrong? What if the fish didn't thrive? What if the land didn't yield enough to support them? That afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, the wife returned from the market, her face tired but determined. She had sold most of the fish they had caught earlier in the week, but the money she had earned barely covered the cost of the supplies they still needed. It was always a balancing act, making just enough to keep the cycle going, but never quite enough to break free from the grind. She walked up to the man, her eyes scanning the field as she approached. "How's everything going here?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with concern. He shrugged, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "It's coming together. The land's ready, but I still don't know if it's going to be enough. We've got to get the fish in soon, and I'm still not sure if we'll have enough to fill the pond." She studied him for a moment, the faintest trace of worry crossing her face. "You've done a lot already. We can only do what we can. The rest will come." But the man wasn't convinced. His gaze lingered on the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight were beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the land. The uncertainty gnawed at him, and he felt as though he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't quite see, something he couldn't control. "I don't know if it will be enough," he repeated, his voice heavy with doubt. "I don't know if we've done enough." She walked over to him, her presence steady and comforting. "We've done everything we can, and if it's not enough, We'll try again. That's all we can do. You're not alone in this. You've got me and you've got the farm. And that's more than a lot of people have. Her words struck a chord with him, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't about perfection or getting everything right on the first try. Maybe it was just about showing up day after day and giving it everything they had. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen, his heart skipping a beat when he saw who was calling. "It's the supplier," he said, his voice suddenly tense. "I'll take this." He stepped away from her, his hands shaking slightly as he answered the call. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was a bit muffled, but the words were clear. "We've got the fish ready for you. It'll be delivered tomorrow." A sense of relief washed over him, but the knot in his stomach remained. "How many?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Enough for the pond. Should be good for the next few months at least. You'll get a mix, tilapia, catfish, and some bass. But if you want more, we can arrange that." He exhaled sharply, feeling a bit of the tension ease from his shoulders. "That's great. Thank you." As the call ended, he turned back to his wife, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "They're sending the fish tomorrow. We've got what we need." Her face lit up with a sense of quiet triumph, and she moved toward him. "That's great news. I knew we could do it." For the first time in days, the man allowed himself to feel a flicker of optimism. Maybe they were getting somewhere after all. Maybe this was the turning point, the moment when everything finally started to fall into place. The following morning, the fish arrived. The air was crisp with the promise of a new beginning, and as the delivery truck backed up to the pond, the couple worked together to unload the crates. There was a renewed energy in the way they moved, a quiet sense of accomplishment that filled the air. "This is it," the man said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We're ready." They began releasing the fish into the newly cleared pond, the water rippling as the fish swam away into their new home. It was a simple moment, but it felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for, the hope they had clung to, the effort they had put in, and the uncertainty they had fought against. As the last of the fish disappeared into the water, the man and his wife stood together at the edge of the pond, watching the ripples fade away. There was still much work to be done, but in that moment it didn't seem so overwhelming. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to face it together. "We did it," the man said softly, turning to his wife. She smiled back at him, the exhaustion in her eyes replaced by a quiet sense of pride. "Yes, we did." The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the pond and the fields beyond. The farm was no longer just a place they worked, it was becoming their life, their future. And as they stood there, side by side, watching the new fish settle into their home, they knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but they were no longer afraid of the unknown. They had each other, and they had the land that had always been a part of them. The future might be uncertain, but together they could face whatever came next.